Well, I'm very excited to be here today with Paige Hamilton of Helmet. Paige, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks.
And here you are at Slow Brew in San Luis Obispo. Before we went on air, you mentioned that you actually are kind of a fan of San Luis Obispo.
I am a fan of this town. I have my dear friends live here, and their daughter's my goddaughter. So, and it's halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, and so I do the drive quite frequently because the I-5 is so ugly. And as you know, the 101 drive between here and San Francisco is much nicer.
Well, Paige, of course, you guys are doing a kind of a world tour, actually doing some shows in other countries in support of the 20th anniversary of Betty.
Yeah.
And so far, what's been the fan reaction, the reception to you guys playing all of the material, including, admittedly, I think on your guys' website, actually also the difficult songs on Betty that require some technical difficulties or technical skills. What's been the reception so far on the tour?
I've been thrilled. The reason we're doing these extra shows in the U.S. came about because the Europe tour was such a rad run. We started in Prague in September. The first show was actually September 11th. It was mind blowing. I'm thrilled because I love playing the music and I love my lineup. I love my band, and so it's kind of a great combination. Also playing for the first time ever in my hometown of Medford, Oregon. Which will be great. So this little run on the West Coast is a little more mellow than the East Coast and Midwest. There's a smaller audiences, but I was determined to do it because I grew up on the West Coast, and my family's out here, and I just felt like it was something we should do. So it's been fun. We did Vegas. It was a good time. Ventura, and then last night we were in Long Beach. So fun. Yeah.
Well, what's your take on? I mean, as a musician and in terms of playing bigger venues, smaller venues, I mean, do you sometimes like the intimacy and kind of the energy from the audience in a smaller venue such as we're here tonight?
Yeah, I prefer it. I mean, you obviously make more money when you play, like our show in Brussels were 1,200 people, London was 900, but it's much less intimate, and I'm thrilled that those shows are successful and stuff, but I'm just a small town a kid, and I like to kind of banter with the audience, and I as everybody knows, after every show over the last 6 or 7 years, I jump down off stage and I shake hands and I talk to everybody and I sign stuff and do photos, and it's a lot easier to do that with 400 people than with 1,200. So
the difference between 30 minutes and 3 hours of your time, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of like I have the extended set, after the show. It can be a couple of hours sometimes. We do a second set. There's a little break. I just say hello after we finish the album, introduce the guys, and we do a second set of material from the other albums, from Strap It On, Meantime, Aftertaste, Size Matters, Monochrome, and Seeing Eye Dog. And then there are even a few things off the Born Annoying punk rock 7-inch, which it's a compilation of punk rock 7-inches that we did very early on, 89. 90. So sometimes we'll pull out one of those songs. Those are really hard and fast, just like, ugh. I'm like, I was young.
Well, I very much look forward to seeing you tonight performing some of that stuff. And here we are. We're talking. You mentioned the just amazing sort of fan receptivity to the Betty tour, and you guys have, of course, put out many albums, but Betty was pretty much your major label release, right? Interscope in '94, is that?
We did, the album Meantime was on Interscope. That was the first album on Interscope. So that was the first time that a larger public was exposed to our odd brand of minimalist riff, sludgery. But and then Meantime was a big out, for an indie band from New York City to have a gold album and a Grammy nomination had never happened before. Obviously, it's just a strange. We never did music to be accessible. I wasn't sitting around thinking like, what's the hook here? How can I get more radio airplay? It's just never. It's not my thing. It wasn't my thing when I was in my 20s. It's certainly not my thing now in my 50s.
And that was the album actually that had the Beavis and Butthead riff, right? On one of the songs off of that one.
Yeah, they did a couple videos on us. Yeah, it was very funny. I saw the first one. I never did see the second one, but the first one was very funny.
That drummer looks like a regular guy.
Yeah. If you saw these guys on the street, you wouldn't even know that they're cool.
Yeah, they look like normal guys, like us.
As a musician, to see yourself being riffed, or actually in their case, they were really, really digging it. So to have the receptivity from Beavis and Butthead, that's kind of you got to put that on your resume somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sitting around like going, man, I made it. We were on Beavis and Butthead, or Gene Simmons loves my band. I made it. He's like, you know, look, as a musician, it's you're either doing it for the money or for recognition or, you know, and fame, etc., or you're doing it because you love music. And I'm a complete dork from a small town in Oregon that got into Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and, you know, and I loved earlier bands when I was a kid, America and the Eagles and stuff like that. And then I discovered jazz guitar, and so I studied jazz guitar at University of Oregon, and I ended up moving to New York to get my master's degree in jazz guitar at Manhattan School of Music. And I have this, music provided something for me in my life that no other activity, nothing else provides. And I still, to this day, I don't know any other way to do it. I can't sit around in a studio or with a producer and talk about like the hook or the whatever. It's not what we do, you know. It's there are hooks in the songs. In my opinion, it's accessible, but it's when I hear more and more music. Our front of house guy is younger. He's in his early 30s, and he listens to terrible music. And in the car, and I can hear the auto tuning and the vocals, and it's just all these. I can't tell them apart. I listen to Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk and Ralph Vaughan Williams and Beethoven and Mozart. And it's like that music has stood the test of time. Obviously, there's a reason it's great, and so I stick with it. And I'm not sitting around listening to AC/DC and Led Zeppelin anymore. But every time I hear it, it's like an old friend. It still sounds great to me, you know. And I think, you know, you can't get away from the soul of your soul, what music is, and it's a form of expression like no other, you know.
Paige, I've watched some other interviews with you, and your precise appreciation of music. Folks like Glenn Branca, who you actually played in his orchestra, correct? Which is amazing.
6 and 8 and 13. The 6 was the first recording on an 8. He didn't have finished, but I did a performance in Seville, Spain, the World's Fair in '93 or 4 or 5, something like that. And then 13, he came to Los Angeles and performed it at Disney Hall, so I did that with him as well. That's 100 electric guitars. It's a phenomenal piece of music. He's one of the biggest influences on my compositional mind. I never heard anything like it. I never played anything like it. He's an amazing human being, in my opinion.
Were you a big fan of kind of the quote no wave kind of noise? You know, John Zorn, John Cage influenced musicians of that era?
No, I moved to New York to go to jazz grad school, and I was like completely immersed in like transcribing Wes Montgomery, Wayne Shorter, and Clifford Brown, and Coltrane solos, and we're doing papers on those people. Some papers I did a great job on, and others, you know, like I got criticized for my Coltrane because I didn't go into depth enough about his personal approach to music or whatever. But I transcribed like, you know, 15-minute John Coltrane solo from Afro Blue Impressions. So can I get, you know, please give me an A. But so I kind of missed that world. And when I did go downtown and audition for Band of Susans, that was my first exposure to that world. And that would have been in 1987 when I finished grad school. I was auditioning for cover bands in Queens, for bands in the East Village and all over. And this Band of Susans thing opened up a whole can of worms for me, a whole new world. And that band, Robert Poss, the leader of that band, is a brilliant guy, and he's had a huge influence on me and also motivated me to start Helmet. So Leonard Bernstein did a series of lectures at Harvard, and in the first lecture he goes into Mozart's Symphony 40. And the first 2 lectures, that's kind of it's musical semantics, and they're genius if you ever get a chance to watch them. But he rearranges the first movement of Mozart's G minor Symphony 40, and he does how it mathematically correct. So this is how it should be if the bar chords were changing. This is where the melodies should fall, because Mozart's crossing the bar line and he's introducing tones that are foreign to the key, and it's Mozart, obviously the greatest composer probably that ever lived, and a genius, and anyone that doesn't think he's a genius has no credibility. And Bernstein, he did this, and he had the Boston Philharmonic play the first movement by the Mozarts, and then he played his rearrangement of it, how it should be, and then Bernstein's like, isn't this awful? It's just terrible. It's like, this is how it would if you were going to analyze something. So why is Mozart's so much better than the anatomically correct, mathematically placed? There are rhythmic things. Beethoven used 2 notes to greater, a musical, power. The Fifth Symphony is the best heavy metal riff ever written. Helmet is based on simple the German idea, a motif, unsung is two notes, da da da, da da da, da da da, da da da. It's just two notes, but it's an interesting rhythmic figure that came to me, sitting facing the air shaft in New York City, where my writing room at the time, and with the pigeon droppings and dead cats and whatever was down there in the air shaft, and you need to work on your craft and listen constantly, and then when it comes time to write, you throw everything out the window. That's how I work. Anyway, I write by ear, I write by intuition, and I write what I hear, and that's, to me, makes I hear a lot of bands, and I hear what they're doing, and it's they might have the ability on Pro Tools and the craft or whatever, but they don't have there's no inspiration. It doesn't feel like anything to me, and that's so it's. People can disagree all they want with me and not like our music. It's up to them. I understand that the presentation of what we're doing is more aggressive than say a rock band like Queens of the Stone Age or whatever. Like our music there's a bit of a hardcore element in it and metal elements, and there's also like a black music element. I mean, T.M. Stevens and Danny Korchmar and Steve Jordan, three musicians that I admired growing up, have come to our shows and say, "Man, you guys groove. It's the music grooves so much," and that just comes from I think that's like the jazz influence, harmonic information and the groove and stuff, and that's because jazz is about that. It's about feel, and it's soul music, and there just happens to be a little bit more going on harmonically, and it's intellectually, there's a lot to digest, and I understand why people don't want to be challenged by it, but I think if you give it a chance and you listen and you spend time with it, that's why I would be bored with something that might be a little more cookie cutter. So
well, I think you've in essence just summed up why sometimes the label metal is not the most applicable to you guys, and yet it's kind of through that genre in which admittedly many fans probably first heard you guys on metal radio or metal shows. So I can only imagine when fans of Helmet hear you talking about these other influences, how you have I guess in some respects, the power almost to direct fans into learning more and going deeper about music history, classic composition, things like that. Have you ever had fans come up to you and say, "Wow, man"? Oh.
Several. A guy last night was, I love that musicians get turned on by us, and a guy was like, "I listened to John Coltrane because of you. You turned me on to all this whole world of music I didn't know existed." Another guy is a guitarist, and he said a similar thing. It wasn't not specifically about John Coltrane, but that our music made him want to be a guitar player, and he explored other genres and other styles of music. Because I say there's, Duke Ellington said it, there are two kinds of music, good and bad. Bob Marley was a genius, in my opinion. That music is some of the most incredible music I've ever heard. There are bands like that, Abyssinians, Saddam Hassania, I think is the album, and there's a song on there called Lego Beast. I was just listening to it last week, and I'm like, well, how in the hell did they come up with this feel, this time, the vocals against the drum and bass? It's beautiful, it's incredible, and there's so much music out there. To limit oneself to one genre or one, I only listen to metal and you're not metal, and I'm like, oh fine, so don't listen to us. It's like I love some metal music.
You guys never, even in the early days, 1989. I mean, you guys were never really rocking the long hair or the metal look, so to speak. There was always an independence of spirit, a DIY sort of approach that you guys took to the art form.
I'd gone through my long hair in high school in the 70s, and my father said, "About time to get a haircut." It's like in the 70s, long hair was just as long as your hair would grow. You know what I mean? There were no cuts. It wasn't a fashion statement. It's like in 1977 in high school, that's how we wore our hair, and we wore platform shoes and puka shell necklaces. I only wore that like twice, and I saw a picture of myself. I'm like, that looks so dumb. I even knew back then it looked pretty dumb. And
were you riding the little plastic skateboard and stuff, or not?
I had a red wooden skateboard with white stripes and metal wheels. It's just awful. I mean, absolutely awful. I could barely tic-tac down the sidewalk. When you're tic-tacking, it's just like push the skateboard and listen to the cracks. We're
going to go online and ask friends and family to somehow dig up a photo of that, because that would be very cool to see. Paige, this is your life. Look at the monitor right now.
Yeah. I've seen plenty of it, yeah.
Well, another question, Paige. We had the pleasure about a month ago of interviewing Andy Gill of Gang of Four, and it was a real pleasure for me. He's one of my heroes, and I had read that he's a huge influence on you. Could you tell us about? I mean, back in the day when you were a kid, were you listening to Gang of Four?
As a kid, I'll credit Robert Poss again. When I moved to New York and went to grad school, and I was kind of immersed in the jazz world, and then I got out of school and I wanted to start auditioning for bands, and as I said, auditioned for many bands, and Band of Susans was one of them. And I loved it. It was all open tune guitars, and I started working with those guys, and we did a cover of Essence Rare. And I just like, this is just incredible music. I mean, and so I actually later, I think it was Henry Rollins' label, did re-releases of Solid Gold and Entertainment, and I did the liner notes for I believe it was Solid Gold, so I just played those records nonstop. There were bands I was rediscovering rock music, because when I was growing up in small town Oregon, it was Boston, Foreigner, Journey, Toto, those kind of bands, and that wasn't. Those bands are all amazing musicians, and they write very catchy songs. It wasn't my world, I liked stuff that was a little raw. I listened to ZZ Top. They were amazing, and ZZ's like AC/DC. I was like, oh, that music's simple. I'm like, then how come nobody can play it? We tried to do a ZZ Top cover in Helmet, and we were going to do LaGrange because it's just one of the best songs ever. And we said, God, what could we do different? So we slowed it down, and it turned out to be Stranglehold by Nuge. But I started getting into bands like Killing Joke and Wire and the Buzzcocks and Gang of Four, even a little bit in Joy Division and that stuff. Though it wasn't as, to me, as intense. It was intense in a different way. I like stuff that's a little more funky, like Geordie's guitar playing and Killing Joke and that stuff, there's just like, you can really bang your head to it. I just love that. I always had that in me. That's part of the Helmet thing. But those bands were huge, and we've covered Killing Joke. I've covered Gang of Four and that other.
Those are all in my Wire. I mean, those are all. It's kind of cliche, but I think in many respects genre-defying artists who came out in a certain socio-cultural musical context. And again, in talking to Andy Gill, I mean, they didn't necessarily fit into what at the time was popular in that scene, popular post-punk stuff. It was very different than the stuff you might hear on Factory Records, as you mentioned. And yet there was a soul, there was a funk, and they were just doing their own thing. And much like you guys, Helmet, within the, quote, metal genre, also just pioneers who weren't really listening to musical critics or other people. You were just pushing forward and doing your own thing, which is great. I want to ask Paige one last question. In terms of style and approach, musical improvisation, I mean, is that something that you would like to do more of? I mean, to be able to do more, I don't want to say free form. I know you've made comments about, different art types of jazz jazz guitar, where at times it becomes a little masturbatory, and I know you don't want to go into that approach, but improvisational approaches, I mean, do you, like during your live shows, do you guys sometimes do freeform?
The Helmet structures are laid out, and then I always joke that I have the lab coat or the roller skates on, and I'm like crashing through there, like a bull in a china shop when I play my solos. I had this conversation with somebody last night about guitarists, and we were listening to something, and I was like, God, the guitar player played something that was just like, you could tell he'd practiced it in his room, and I said, it just made me cringe. It was just like, that's my least favorite kind of guitar solo. Like, I practiced this pattern, like this scalar pattern, and I'm going to play that. Jazz improvisation is about hearing ideas and developing a motif, just like composition is. Like Beethoven's developing an idea, Mozart's developing an idea, Charlie Parker, Jim Hall, Bill Evans, they're two notes, it's taking that idea and developing it as you would a conversation, and that's what I'm improvising during every Helmet show. I might start certain solos are melodic parts that I play off the record, like I Care is a combination of parts that the solo is a melodic thing, or the song Miserable is a similar thing. I play it's a solo, but it's not improvised, it's a part of the song. But songs like off Betty Tonight, you'll hear Wilma's Rainbow, Speechless, Tick. These are all me improvising, and I might start the solo in the same place. to have a jumping off point, but as harmonic gravity would dictate that it would go in a different direction in every single day, because your mood and the sound and whatever you're up against influences you, and you should be open to that. And just playing a collection of riffs and crap, to me can get kind of boring.
Well, Paige, I guess that's good news for Helmet fans out there, because if you see Helmet multiple times, likely that you'll see a certain organic nature to things that is a little different every show. So if you follow...
And the second set is always, we're playing the Betty album, but the second set I vary it every night, because we have another 50-something, 55 songs that we know. So I try to keep it, for all of us, it keeps it more interesting to vary that set. There have been a few touchstones in the set. I just decided, because I didn't want to hear people complain anymore. He's like, you didn't do Unsung. I'm like, okay, we're doing Unsung every night on this entire tour. So, and it's still fun, and people like it, but it might come at, be sandwiched between Harmless and Give It. I don't know.
One of those fan favorites that, like you said, if you didn't play them, it would become an issue or something. So, yeah.
Which I've done over years. I feel like the Helmet fans appreciate whatever we play, but there are always a few people that met a lot of people last night that had never even heard of the band. And they were dragged down by other friends and just blown away and loved it, and that makes me happy. That we're. They didn't know any of the songs, so it's they're probably born in like 2000 or something.
All right, well, there we go. Paige, of course, thank you for your time, and very excited to hear you guys exposing your music and yourselves, but in an appropriate legal way, to a whole new generation of fans out there. Thank you so much for your time, man. Thank you, man.